My husband disappeared 3 days before our anniversary and his sister showed up with a $12,000 bill, saying, "He said you'd cover it since you're the real boss now." I laughed, pointed at the bill, and said, "This will be the only thing you'll ever get from me, a receipt for your entitlement." Her jaw dropped as I dialed my lawyer. I live in a small town just outside Raleigh, North Carolina, a place where everyone knows your name and most of your business, whether you want them to or not. I'm Jenna, in my early 40s, with a quiet life that I used to be proud of. My marriage to Ray had been solid, or so I thought, until the cracks started to show. It wasn't that we were unhappy, at least not in the beginning. We were comfortable. Comfortable enough to stop paying attention to each other. Comfortable enough that I didn't notice when everything started to unravel. Ray and I had been together for nearly 18 years. We met when I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of college, and full of hope that life would turn out just like the stories. At first, it did. We had good jobs, a small house, and a couple of dogs we treated like our children. The small town we lived in felt like a warm, cozy blanket. Our house, while not anything fancy, was filled with warmth. We had this tradition every year. On our anniversary, we would go to this little Italian restaurant in town. It wasn't a high-end place by any means, but it was ours. It was the one night of the year that we made time for each other, to remember why we got married in the first place. But recently, everything felt different. I noticed how Ray had started spending more time at the office, staying late, and coming home with this distant look in his eyes. He wasn't angry, not in the way people usually get when they're hiding something. No, he was more like someone trying to disappear, to fade into the background. He'd come home, eat dinner, and retreat to his study, where I could hear the soft tapping of keys on his computer, but never asked what he was doing. I respected his space, gave him the benefit of the doubt. He'd been working hard, after all. He'd come home from his office, run his hand through his hair, and look at me like he was seeing me for the first time all day. There were other things too. His phone, always face down on the table. He'd start a conversation with me, but halfway through, he'd get distracted by a text or a notification. His responses were clipped. Like he was there, but not really. It didn't feel like infidelity, not at first. It just felt like a slow drift into something I didn't recognize. I didn't want to confront him, didn't want to sound like some crazy, paranoid wife. I convinced myself that maybe it was just stress, maybe it was just work. People drift, right? I kept telling myself that it was normal, that every marriage went through ups and downs, and maybe we were just going through a phase. But then came the morning of our anniversary. It was the third Thursday in May, a day that I had circled on the calendar for months. I'd planned it all, a nice dinner at home, his favorite steak, and a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. I woke up early to set the table, to get everything ready before he woke up, and to surprise him. But when I walked into the living room to find him still in bed, I saw the empty space where his side should have been. The bed was untouched, the blankets undisturbed. I called out to him, but there was no response. I checked the bathroom, the kitchen. His car was gone. No note. No call. Nothing. My heart dropped, and my mind raced. Maybe he had gone to the office early? Maybe there was an emergency? But as the hours dragged on, and my calls went unanswered, that familiar knot in my stomach grew tighter. Something wasn't right. Ray had never just disappeared like this before. We had plans, after all. It was our anniversary. By the time the afternoon came, I was pacing. I made myself lunch, but I couldn't eat. It sat in front of me, a reminder of the plans I'd made that would never happen. I kept trying to rationalize it, kept telling myself it was just one of those things. But then, just as I was starting to lose hope, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and standing there was Natalie, Ray's younger sister. She had this way about her, always walking into a room like she owned it. And she usually did. She was confident, successful, the type of person who always had something to prove, but never needed to try hard to do it. The kind of person I tried to like but secretly resented. She had a sharp tongue and a sharper smile, and if she had $1 for every time she made me feel small, she'd probably be able to retire early. But I never said anything. I smiled, laughed along, and kept my mouth shut when she made jokes at my expense. But that day, there was something different about her. She was here, and she was alone. She walked in without waiting for me to invite her, and she headed straight for the kitchen like she belonged there. "Where's Ray?" I asked, trying to mask the anxiety I felt building up in my chest. Natalie didn't even look at me as she opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. "He's not coming back tonight," she said, her voice as flat as ever. "What do you mean?" My heart raced, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. "Where is he? Why didn't he tell me?" I don't know, Jenna. She finally turned to face me, and there was something about her eyes that made me uneasy. I think you need to sit down. I didn't. Instead, I stood there, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath before speaking. Ray's gone. He left. And I know you're probably confused, but you're going to need to deal with this. You'll have to take care of it. My mind went blank. What are you talking about? I stammered. Take care of what? She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on the counter between us. This is why I'm here. I stared at it for a moment, not understanding. But then, the knot in my stomach twisted even tighter as I took the envelope and opened it. Inside, I found stacks of bills, overdue payments, credit card debts, $12,000 worth of financial obligations Ray had been hiding from me. Loans he'd taken out without my knowledge, credit cards maxed out, and personal debts from people I'd never met. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my hands begin to shake as I looked through the documents. Where did all this come from? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Natalie watched me with cold, calculating eyes. It's Ray's. He's been hiding it from you for months, maybe longer. But he said you'd take care of it, that you'd handle it, since you're the real boss now. I could feel my entire world tilting. My legs were shaky, and I grabbed the counter for support. Ray told you this? I said, the disbelief rising in my voice. She shrugged. I don't know. But it's on you now, Jenna. You have to clean up his mess. I stood there, staring at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at her, but I didn't. I just stood frozen, holding the envelope, not knowing what to do with it. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about betrayal. About the man I had spent almost 2 decades with, who I thought I knew better than anyone, turning out to be someone completely different. Someone who had hidden this from me, someone who had kept me in the dark about things that affected both of us. And now, his sister, who I had always thought of as a rival, was standing here, telling me I was the one who had to take care of it. Her words echoed in my mind, you're the real boss now. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over me. You can't be serious. I am, she replied, her voice cutting through the air. Ray's gone. And this is your responsibility now. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, boiling over, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. The shock was still too fresh. I looked down at the bill again, at the amount. $12,000. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. My savings weren't deep enough for this kind of mess. But the more I thought about it, the clearer something became. This wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even about Ray's disappearance. It was about me, about my life, my choices. For so long, I had let myself be dragged along by Ray's decisions, by his secrets, by his lies. But I was done. I wasn't going to clean up his mess. Not now, not ever. I could feel the weight of the bills in my hands, heavy and suffocating. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I stood there, staring at the pile of paper in front of me as if it was somehow going to offer an explanation. But no matter how hard I looked at them, they just stared back at me, cold, indifferent, like a cruel reminder of how little I actually knew about the man I had spent so many years with. Natalie was still standing by the counter, watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction, maybe even hoping I'd fold, beg her to take the burden off my shoulders. But there was nothing she could say, nothing she could do, that would change the fact that I was done. Jenna, you can't just ignore this, she said, her voice softer now, like she was trying to reason with me. But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was too busy replaying every moment with Ray that now seemed like a lie. How many times had he promised me we were in this together? How many times had he told me everything was fine, that I didn't need to worry? But I had worried. I had. And now I was standing in the middle of our kitchen, the room where we used to sit and talk over dinner, and it felt like a stranger's house. Everything was foreign, wrong. The warm scent of the roast I had planned for dinner lingered in the air like a ghost, and all I could do was stand there and stare at the envelope in front of me. I don't know what you want me to do, Natalie, I finally said, my voice tight. This isn't my mess to clean up. Ray can handle it when he gets back. Her eyes narrowed. He's not coming back, Jenna. Not anytime soon. And you know it. I didn't respond. I didn't want to admit what I was beginning to feel deep down in my gut. That she was right. That Ray wasn't coming back. I had been holding onto a thread of hope, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he had some reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe he had a plan to fix this. Maybe he just needed time to sort things out. But the more I looked at the bills, the more I realized that he wasn't coming back. And even if he did, it didn't matter. He'd lied to me. He'd betrayed me. The thought of him in that office, playing his little game of disappearing, of hiding things from me. It made my blood boil. I'm not paying these, I said, my voice steady but full of resolve. I won't. I'm not cleaning up his mess. Jenna, you're the one who's going to be left with the consequences of all this, she pressed, her tone turning sharp. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. I shook my head, refusing to look at her anymore. I don't care. This is his problem now. Not mine. I turned and started walking toward the door, not caring if she followed. The last thing I needed was her hovering over me, trying to guilt me into something I didn't want to do. I wasn't about to be her scapegoat. I wasn't about to let her manipulate me into taking responsibility for Ray's failures. Natalie didn't follow me out the door. Instead, she stood there, watching me like she was waiting for me to break. But I wasn't going to break. Not this time. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, dialed the number I had been avoiding for days, my lawyer. I needed to talk to someone who could help me navigate this mess. I needed to know where I stood legally, what my options were, and what kind of protection I had against all this. The phone rang twice before a voice on the other end answered. Jenna, what's going on? Brad, I said, my voice tight. I need help. I could hear him shifting papers in the background, probably getting ready for another client meeting. He was a good lawyer, but he was also one of those people who didn't like drama. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened, about Ray disappearing and Natalie showing up with a $12,000 bill. Brad was quiet for a moment, processing what I said. Jenna, this is a mess. But you need to be careful. I don't know where Ray is, but whatever this is, it's bad. You need to protect yourself. I don't even know what I'm protecting myself from, I muttered. This whole thing is insane. I just want to know what my rights are, Brad. I want to know if I'm legally responsible for this debt. First things first, Jenna, he said, his tone serious. You need to make sure that you're not signing anything or agreeing to anything without legal counsel. I don't care what anyone tells you. If Ray's gone and left this mess behind, it's important to understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. I know, I said, running a hand through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. But I don't even know where to start. I can't just keep pretending everything's fine when my whole life feels like it's falling apart. Take a breath, Brad said gently. I'll help you figure this out. But we need to take it one step at a time. Let's start with the debts. Do you have copies of everything Natalie gave you? I said. I'm holding them in my hands. Good, he replied. We'll go through them together. I'll help you figure out your next steps. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Talking to Brad made me feel like I was starting to gain some control back. At least for now, I had someone in my corner. And that was more than I had 5 minutes ago when I was standing there, overwhelmed and alone. After hanging up with Brad, I went back into the living room, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that the man I had built my life with, the man I trusted, had hidden something like this from me. And Natalie, Ray's sister, wasn't even pretending to be sympathetic. She was pushing me to fix it, as if I was the one who owed something. As if I were somehow responsible for cleaning up after him. My head was spinning. The silence in the house felt deafening. Ray's absence was a constant, heavy reminder that everything had changed, that nothing would ever be the same again. I tried to focus, to ground myself, but my mind kept circling back to the bills, to Ray's disappearance. I thought about how long this had been going on. How much longer had he been lying to me? How many times had I convinced myself that things were fine, that he was just stressed, or busy? How had I let myself ignore the signs for so long? It was easy to blame him. To feel betrayed, to resent him for leaving me with this mess. But somewhere deep down, I knew that I had ignored my own instincts. I had let myself be complacent, too comfortable in my own life to see what was happening right in front of me. But now, I had to deal with it. I had no choice. I stared at the bills again, my fingers tracing the numbers on the page. $12,000. I didn't have that kind of money to just throw away. And I wasn't going to give in to whatever power struggle Ray and Natalie were trying to drag me into. As I sat there, the weight of the situation starting to settle in, I realized something. I wasn't just dealing with Ray's debts. I was dealing with the shattered pieces of my own life. And I had to figure out how to put it all back together, whether Ray came back or not. I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing, I wasn't going to be the one to clean up his mess. Not anymore. I spent the next few hours sitting in the living room, staring at the pile of papers that still lay on the coffee table. The evening sun was starting to dip behind the trees outside, casting long shadows through the windows. The warm light that used to feel like comfort now just felt hollow. Every tick of the clock echoed in the silence, reminding me that Ray was still missing and that my life was, in one way or another, on hold. Natalie hadn't left. She had decided to stay, which I hadn't agreed to but couldn't bring myself to ask her to leave. It felt like too much to handle alone, and though I would never admit it to her, I felt like I needed some sort of support. Even if that support came in the form of her cold, judgmental presence. She sat on the couch opposite me, scrolling through her phone, not saying anything for what seemed like an eternity. Every now and then, she'd glance at me, but she wasn't offering any comfort. I didn't know if she expected me to break down or what, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Not when I had been holding it together for so long. Finally, after what felt like the longest silence of my life, she put her phone down and looked at me. Her expression was hard to read, but I could tell there was something else behind her eyes, something deeper than just a simple annoyance or impatience. "Jenna," she started, her voice almost apologetic, "I know you're mad at me, but you need to understand. Ray didn't just leave you because of some stupid debt. He's been struggling for months, maybe even longer." I cut her off before she could continue. "I don't want to hear it, Natalie. I don't want to hear about how hard his life is when I've been living in the same house, going through the same motions. And I definitely don't want to hear about how you think I should clean up after him." Her face fell, and for the first time that evening, I saw a flicker of something like guilt in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was there. "Jenna, I'm just trying to make you see the bigger picture. I'm not trying to take his side or make you feel worse. I'm just trying to help you understand what's really going on." "I don't need your help," I snapped, my voice rising before I could stop it. "I've been with Ray for 18 years. I thought I understood him. I thought we were partners. But now, it feels like I've been living with a stranger. I don't need you to explain him to me. I need answers." Natalie flinched, but she didn't argue back. She just stared at me for a long moment, then finally looked down at her hands in her lap. "You're right. I can't give you the answers you want. But I'm here because Ray left you with a mess. And I think, deep down, you know that he's not coming back. Not to fix this, at least." I bit back a bitter laugh. She was right about one thing, Ray wasn't coming back, not in the way I had hoped. I had been clinging to the idea that maybe he'd show up, apologizing, explaining everything. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that whatever had been going on behind the scenes, Ray had already made his choice. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but I had to. Ray was gone. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. The man I had shared a life with had been hiding things from me for years, building a web of lies I was only just beginning to untangle. "I don't know what to do anymore," I whispered, more to myself than to Natalie. My shoulders sagged, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't even know where to begin." "Start with the basics," she said softly. "You need to take care of yourself first. You can't fix what's broken until you know what you're dealing with." It wasn't much, but something in her tone made me feel like maybe, just maybe, she understood a little bit of what I was going through. Or at least, she could relate to the feeling of being completely lost, alone, and overwhelmed. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed her words. I didn't want to fix things anymore. I wanted to forget. I wanted to ignore the bills, the lies, the empty house. But there was no escaping it. If I didn't face it now, I would be left with even less than I had before. The rest of the night passed in a fog. Natalie stayed until late, her presence like a shadow in the background as I went through the motions of my evening routine. It felt pointless, going through the motions of a life that no longer seemed to belong to me. But I did it anyway. I made myself dinner, though I didn't really eat. I watched TV for a few hours, but I couldn't focus on anything. And then, when it was time for bed, I lay in the same bed Ray and I used to share and tried not to think about the emptiness next to me. Sleep came in fitful bursts. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind would replay the events of the day, the shock of seeing those bills, the coldness of Natalie's eyes, the fear I had felt when I realized Ray had just disappeared. I wanted to scream, to lash out at the unfairness of it all, but I held it in, knowing that there was no one to scream at. There was no one to fix it. I woke up the next morning with the same knot in my stomach. I had slept for a few hours, but it hadn't been restful. It hadn't been enough. I pulled myself out of bed, trying to shake off the lingering dread that weighed me down. I had called my lawyer the day before, but I knew that wasn't enough. There were still too many unanswered questions. Where had Ray gone? Why had he really left? What did all of this mean for me, for our life together? And why hadn't he trusted me enough to share any of this with me before it all fell apart? I went to work that morning, trying to distract myself from the chaos at home, but it was impossible to focus. Every little thing reminded me of Ray, of the life we had built together. The clock on my desk, the picture of us at the lake on vacation last summer, it all felt like a cruel reminder of how easily everything could slip away. At lunchtime, I found myself sitting in the break room, my food untouched in front of me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment, I thought it might be Ray. But when I checked the screen, it wasn't him. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I said, my voice tight. "Jenna." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "This is Jeremy from the bank. I'm calling about your husband's accounts. We need to discuss some recent activity. Can you come in today?" My stomach dropped. More bills. More problems. I hadn't even begun to address what was already in front of me, and now here was another call, another piece of the puzzle that I wasn't sure I could put together. I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll be there." I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long moment. This was getting worse by the minute. Ray had left me with more than I could handle, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to carry the weight of it all. But I didn't have a choice. If I didn't face it now, it would consume me. And so, I stood up, took a deep breath, and grabbed my purse. It was time to find out what else Ray had left behind. I didn't want to go to the bank. I didn't want to deal with the next piece of this nightmare. But I had no choice. The call had been too pointed, too urgent for me to ignore. As I stepped out of the office and into my car, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. I was done with all the uncertainty, done with waiting for answers that never seemed to come. The drive to the bank felt like it took forever. The streets were crowded with people going about their day, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. I parked my car and sat for a moment, staring at the building in front of me. This wasn't just about the bills anymore. This was about everything, about Ray's betrayal, about how he had disappeared without so much as a word, leaving me to pick up the pieces. When I walked into the bank, I was met by Jeremy, the man who had called me earlier. He was a tall, clean-cut man in his 30s, wearing a suit that looked too stiff for the situation. He had a pleasant smile on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Willer," he asked, his voice smooth, professional. "Please, follow me. We can discuss the details in my office." I nodded and followed him down a long corridor, my heart racing. I didn't know what I expected, maybe another pile of papers, maybe more explanations that didn't make sense. But whatever it was, I wasn't prepared for what I walked into. His office was a sleek, modern space, filled with glossy wood paneling and framed awards on the wall. The kind of office that felt impersonal, like everything in it was for show. He gestured for me to sit, and I did so, folding my hands tightly in my lap. "So," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's this about?" Jeremy sat down across from me, tapping a few keys on his computer before pulling up a set of documents. "Well, Mrs. Willer, as you know, your husband has an outstanding balance on his accounts. However, there's something else you should be aware of." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" He didn't hesitate, though there was a slight shift in his posture. "It's come to our attention that there were some large transfers made from Mr. Willer's accounts in the months leading up to his disappearance. It appears he had been making payments to certain entities, payments that, at first glance, looked like he was attempting to hide something." My stomach sank. I didn't know what I had been expecting, but it sure as hell wasn't this. "What are you talking about?" "Payments to whom?" "Several offshore accounts," Jeremy replied, his fingers scrolling through the screen. "We've been investigating his activities, and there's been a pattern of suspicious transactions." I could feel the room closing in on me, like the walls were getting smaller with each word he said. "Suspicious? Are you telling me he was hiding money from me?" Jeremy nodded. "It appears so. There's been a significant amount of money funneled into these accounts, and we believe Mr. Willer was using these funds to pay off debts, avoid taxes, and, well, perhaps finance some activities that were less than legal." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers from Jeremy about how he could be telling me this in such a calm, detached manner. But another part of me, the part that had felt betrayed for so long, was beginning to understand exactly what had happened. Ray hadn't just lied to me. He had been hiding everything from me. The money, the debts, the secrets. "So you're telling me that Ray was stealing money from his own accounts?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jeremy nodded again. "That's one way to put it, yes. And we believe you have the right to know about it, given your current situation. The truth is, we've been trying to track him down for some time, but he's been uncooperative, to put it lightly. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. Ray had been playing a game I hadn't even known I was part of. All these years of building a life together, and it had been built on lies. On secrets I hadn't even known existed. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I want full access to all his accounts. Everything. I want to know where this money is, where it's been going. Jeremy hesitated, but then he nodded. I can't give you access directly, but I can put you in touch with our legal team. They'll work with you to get the information you need. I stood up, my resolve firming up inside me. I'll need it in writing, I said. I want to make sure I get everything that's mine. Jeremy looked surprised, but he quickly recovered. Of course. I'll have the paperwork drawn up. As I left the bank, my mind was spinning. I wasn't just dealing with Ray's debts anymore. I was dealing with his betrayal on a whole new level. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a direction. Like I wasn't just waiting for things to get worse. I was going to make sure Ray didn't get away with any of this. When I got home, I called Brad immediately. He was quiet for a moment when I told him everything that had happened. Jenna, he finally said, his voice low, you've got the leverage now. If Ray is involved in all of this, if he's hiding money and running from his responsibilities, you've got the upper hand. I want it all, I said, feeling a surge of power I hadn't felt in weeks. I want everything. The money, the debts, the truth. I'm not just going to sit here and wait for him to fix this. I'm done letting him control what happens next. Brad paused, and I could hear him scribbling something down on paper. You've got a strong case, Jenna. We'll get it all sorted out. But you need to make sure you stay firm. This is your chance to take control. I hung up with Brad and took a deep breath. I had a long road ahead of me. But for the first time since Ray had disappeared, I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about me. Days passed, and the pieces slowly started falling into place. I hired a private investigator to track Ray down, and the legal team at the bank worked tirelessly to get me access to everything I needed. What I found was even worse than I could have imagined. The offshore accounts, the hidden debts, the lies. Ray had been using me as a shield, hoping I wouldn't notice the cracks in the facade. But I did notice. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I didn't have to wait long for Ray to reappear. 3 weeks after his disappearance, he showed up at my door, looking disheveled, his eyes wide with panic. He hadn't expected me to take control of everything like I had. Jenna, please, I can explain, he started, but I cut him off before he could finish. No, I said, my voice steady. You can't explain anything. You've done enough. I handed him a folder of papers, documents proving everything he had hidden, all the lies, all the money he had stolen. I've already contacted the authorities, I told him coldly. You're not getting out of this. Not this time. Ray's face went pale as he took the folder from me, his hands shaking. He looked like he might say something else, but there was nothing left to say. His world had crumbled, and I had just watched it happen, knowing that the only person who was going to fix things now was me. Do you have anything else to say? I asked, my voice cold, calculating. He looked at me, his eyes full of fear. But I didn't feel sorry for him. I had already made peace with what had happened. No, he muttered, his voice hollow. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I smiled, just a little, because I knew the truth now. And that was all I needed. Good, I said. Because this is the last time you'll ever walk through that door. Ray didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just turned and walked away, leaving behind the life we had built together. And as the door closed behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace. For the first time in a long time, I could finally see a way forward. The weight was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. Ray had made his choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. And as for Natalie? Well, she wouldn't be getting any more help from me either. I'd made sure of that. When I closed my eyes that night, there were no more lingering doubts. No more wondering if Ray would come back and fix things. He had made his bed, and I was done lying in it. I had taken control. And that felt like a victory.